Hey everybody, it's Kristianna Mrjenovich, your second chance queen, and tonight I'm going to be doing a solo episode where I talk about something that is super important to me, and it's part of my 4-part self method of confidence building, and I think it's really pivotal for everybody, whether you're in the pageantry community or not a member of the pageantry community, to practice this. And so tonight's episode is all about self-care. Now, I believe that there are 3 forms of self-care in the form of past self-care, present self-care, and future self-care. And so tonight I'm going to break those 3 down, talk about what they look like and how they affect you and why they're so important for your mental health. Self-care is something that should not be taken lightly. A lot of times when we're mothers, business owners, friends, daughters, family members, all of these titles that we wear, especially if you're a pageant queen too, peers, you wear so many titles as a human being, and a lot of those are really draining. Being a mother of 3 kids myself, I know how difficult self-care is when you're a mother, especially. But that is when self-care is actually the most important. It's through being a mother that I've noticed how important self-care is for the health of my kids as well as the health of me. So I'm going to talk about that today. Being a mom is one of the most rewarding and draining roles at one time, and people don't realize how much that can really take out of you. So then you add in a work balance, or if you're a stay-at-home mom, the toll of being a stay-at-home mom. You can add in being an entrepreneur. You can add in being someone that volunteers your time. And there's the reason that the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup, is an actual saying that is 100% valid. And so often we find ourselves pouring into other cups. We're pouring into the mother cup. We're pouring into the work cup. We're pouring into the husband cup. If you're married or if you're in a relationship, you're pouring into the volunteer cup. You're pouring into pageant titles. If you're a pageant queen, you're pouring into all of these different cups. And at the end of the day, if your cup has a hole in it, then it's going to be way more difficult for you. So the first type of self-care that I think is the root of everything and very high on the totem pole as far as importance is past self-care. So you're probably going to think I'm crazy and say, how do you do past self-care? How is that a thing? Well, that's because all of us as humans have trauma. Fortunately, you can have the best childhood, you can have a stable childhood, you can have a happy childhood, and you're still going to carry trauma from those experiences. There's still going to be core memories that aren't necessarily good ones. There's still going to be habits that you develop as coping mechanisms from being a child, attachment issues that you might have from being a child. So past self-care is really important in terms of identifying those things that are affecting you as an adult that the child version of you has not had healed yet. So one method to do that, and something that I find very important, is therapy. I've been in therapy for several years now with an amazing therapist who's really helped me work through the things that I may not have realized that I had from growing up, and to start healing those wounds and doing the inner work on myself. You can't change people around you. As much as we'd like to, a lot of times you can't change people around you. If you have childhood trauma, you're not going to be able to change the bullies. You're not going to be able to change your parents if it came from your parents. You're not going to be able to change the source of those damages. But you can heal the inner child that's inside of you that has had those wounds inflicted on them. So a huge tool for me has been therapy, and that's been super useful in identifying and rectifying those trauma issues that I have within myself. But that also brings me to arguably the most important point of that, is being self-aware. When I first had my son, who's 10 years old, he was diagnosed when he was about 5 with ADHD. And I knew nothing about ADHD, knew nothing about emotional dysregulation. I knew nothing about sensory overload. I knew nothing that came with having a child with ADHD. And my son would get very dysregulated, especially as he started to get older. And as a parent, I started to find it really triggering in myself. When he would get dysregulated, he would start screaming, he would start yelling, and I would start to get reactive, and it was not a healthy situation for him or for me. And so I realized that that was not a good thing. I did not want to be a mom that yelled. I did not want to be a mom that was reactive, and that my child was not responsible for triggering those emotions in me and for opening those wounds up that I had that I may not have been aware of and having those surface. So the first thing that I did was I became self-aware of those things. I stopped and I realized that I was getting triggered, that I was having things that were unresolved, and I was getting that emotional buildup, and that my child wasn't going to be responsible for the things that I needed to take care of as an adult. And how could I teach my child how to regulate his emotions or a healthy way to express his emotions if I hadn't figured that out on my own as an adult? So I did a lot of inner work on that triggering me and kind of shifting my mindset. And now I don't get super dysregulated and yell at them. I very rarely yell at my kids. And that's something that I am very proud of. I still discipline them. They don't get away with everything. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself even a gentle parent, but I don't yell. I don't get dysregulated. I don't say hurtful things. I control my emotions. I stay calm, and I try and put myself in his shoes. That's been a lot easier since I've been diagnosed with ADHD, because I realized that kind of what was happening in my brain, and that I needed to step back and kind of dissect that, and also show compassion for my son, because I was struggling as a late 20s, early 30s adult. And so he's going to struggle. And shifting my mindset and changing that really has affected my parenting relationship with my kids. I have a much better relationship with my son because I know that I'm not the mom that yells at him all the time. I'm not the mom that lets my emotions get the best of me. I'm not the mom that makes hurtful comments because I'm dysregulated and I'm overstimulated. Do I still get dysregulated and overstimulated? Absolutely. I have 3 kids. I have a 10-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an almost 2-year-old. And when they get going and the dogs get going and everything goes crazy, I definitely get overwhelmed and overstimulated. But I can recognize that in myself and remove myself or do what I need to do in the moment to handle that. So a huge thing is identifying those triggers in yourself, identifying the past traumas that need to be healed, and then finding the method of working through that works for you. Whether it's a therapist, whether it's a cognitive behavioral therapy workbook that you can get off Amazon, whether it's self-help books, whatever you need to do in order to start healing that inner child and healing those traumas that you're carrying so that you can be a better version of your present self. That's super important, and that is a huge form of past self-care. So I highly recommend that you dig into those issues. A lot of times we get stuck in this mindset, I am who I am and I'm not going to change. Well, that's just the lazy way of thinking. Yes, there are certain things about us that are the way that they are and they're not going to change. But none of that has to be unhealthy habits. None of that has to be trauma-based. None of that has to be things that could be changed if you're willing to do the work and make it happen. And so I've done the work, I've made it happen. I'm always a work in progress. It's never going to be completed, but at least I've started the journey and I'm a couple years into it. And who I am as a mother is definitely unrecognizable to who I was before I did all the work on my past self and my past self-care. So that's a huge thing. The second form of self-care that most people are going to recognize as self-care is what I refer to as present self-care. So present self-care is what it looks like when you're taking care of your emotions, your mental state, your body, present time. So I've mentioned a million times on a million episodes that I love bubble baths. That's one way that I decompress, I relax, I go take a bath, I scroll through TikTok, I scroll through Instagram, I make Instagram posts that I might not have gotten to make that day. or I read a book. I have a couple books from some of my Sash sisters that I'm currently reading, and those sit on a table right next to my bath. So that's one way that I practice self-care. Another way that I practice self-care is when I go and get my nails done, or I go and get my hair done, or I go take some sort of a class. Sometimes I'll go to like a floral design class with my mom to have fun, or go see a movie, or go get lunch with friends. It's anything that you're doing for yourself that makes your present self start to feel refilled. I mentioned earlier in the episode the empty cup, and you can't pour from an empty cup. So your past self-care is going to be those holes in your cup that make you drain faster. You've got to patch those holes. Then present self-care is starting to fill that cup, starting to pour into yourself so that you can be the best version of yourself. Something that I've noticed is my mental health directly correlates to how much self-care I'm practicing. If I'm neglecting myself and putting everybody around me first, putting my job first, putting my kids first, putting my husband first, putting everything else first, and I don't take care of myself, my mental health completely tanks. And then I experience burnout, and then I'm down for the count until I can recover from that. So I try and stay ahead of that burnout, and I try and stay ahead of that cycle by practicing current self-care. And that can change from day to day. What that looks like today may not be what it is tomorrow, but I do firmly believe in practicing some form of current self-care every day. It doesn't have to be expensive, it doesn't have to be time consuming, doesn't have to be complicated. Present self-care can be easy. It can be taking a 15-minute bubble bath. It can be writing in a journal for a couple minutes. It can be doing something that just relaxes you, meditating for a couple minutes. Whatever you need to do that day to practice at least a couple minutes of present self-care. One thing to mention with this is I'm fortunate in that I have a partner that I can rely on to make sure that I'm accomplishing self-care. One of my other favorite forms of self-care is a nap. And when I am in need of a nap, I'm lucky that I have a husband that will kind of hold down the fort so that I can take a nap during the day, as long as work permits it. So that's something that I love about my husband. And if you don't have that type of support from a partner, then I would strongly encourage you to visit some of my other episodes where I talk about my journey with domestic abuse. I'm not saying if you don't have a supportive partner, you're experiencing abuse. But for me, that was one of the things that I did correlate to the abuse was I did not have a supportive partner. I did not have a partner that worried about my mental health. I did not have any support, and that made things extremely difficult. So if you're in a situation where you're not feeling supported, everyone should have some form of a support group, whether it's a partner, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member. So please make sure that you are surrounding yourself with people that can support you and love you, because everybody should have that. Everyone deserves that. You should never feel alone. You're not alone, and I don't want you to feel that way. So that's present self-care. It's doing the things that you need to take care of yourself now in this moment, in this time in 2025. A form of the final form of self-care is what I call future self-care. Now, I coined this term actually on an episode with the amazing Amber Rosenberry, who was International Ms. Oregon last year. We are Sash sisters, and we're Sash sisters for life. I love Amber. But we coined the term future care or future self-care, and it ties to her nesting doll theory that she has. I have an episode that's out that mentions that theory. So if you look for the episode with Amber Rosenberry, you will find her nesting doll mention, and it's also on my social media. But future self-care is doing things for self-care that may not serve you right now, but are aligning for things in your future. Something that I consider future self-care for me is when I work on things that are for one of my small businesses. So I have technically two businesses, but one of them has a DBA for a brand new business that I'm going to be launching. And so something that I consider future care is when I work on something for that business, whether it's taking 5 minutes to look at inventory, whether it's scrolling for inspiration, anything that I'm doing that's contributing to that goal being accomplished. I'm somebody that has to have goals. I'm very driven. And if I don't have something that I'm working towards, I don't have a sense of purpose and it makes me feel empty. So I need to have a goal that I'm looking to accomplish. So right now, one of my future goals is the work that I'm doing for the International Mrs. USA prelims for the International Miss System. I am currently Mrs. Florida 2025. So I'm constantly thinking of how I can be prepared for that pageant. It's not until January 2026, but I'm going to put in the work now and throughout 2025 to be aligned, ready, and confident when that pageant approaches. So something that I love about the International Miss System is the empowerment plan. And a huge part of the empowerment plan is figuring out what you would accomplish and what your goal is should you become International Mrs. USA and then eventually International Ms. They want to see what you're going to do with your title. International Ms. is a system that is very much focused on empowering others in the work that you're already doing. So they want to see your plan. They want to see that you're going to be a working queen, and the empowerment plan is a huge part of that. So for me, I'm starting to look at that empowerment plan already, even though it's only January of 2025, and I'm starting to align those things so that when the time comes, my empowerment plan is in motion. It's already working towards its goals, and I know what I'm doing. I have a concrete vision, not only for my reign as Mrs. Florida, but should I become International Mrs. USA. So in pageantry, it's very helpful to have future care, which is knowing what goals you want to accomplish, knowing what you want to do with your title and your reign, and how you're going to move forward into that position, into that phase, and do that work. So that is one way that I practice future care, is working on the projects and the things that I plan to launch as Mrs. Florida and as International Mrs. USA in the future. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is your career. If you're working towards something, if you're working towards a career goal, working towards something educationally, anything that you're doing towards the future. So sometimes it might feel like you're in the trenches now and, you're really busy, you've got a lot going on, you're juggling a lot. But those things that are working towards your future goals are a form of self-care in an odd way. So sometimes you have to really make sure that you're practicing present self-care because sometimes you're doing a lot towards the future self-care as well. It can get overwhelming if you get out of balance. So make sure that you're taking time really to slow down and rest. With future self-care, you really want to be working towards your goals. You want to be setting up what your future looks like. If you would have told me 4 or 5 years ago that in 5 years I was going to be a pageant queen and I was going to have another business and I was going to branch off from that business and I was going to be launching social projects and hosting a podcast and doing all of these things with my time, I would have thought that you were nuts. Because at that point in time, I was a mom. I was struggling with having 2 kids. I hadn't found balance yet. I was struggling with my business, and my career really is not something that I would have essentially chosen for myself. Younger me chose it because it was the easier route, because it was a family business, but it wasn't my passion. And so I felt the weight of that 5 years ago. It's turned into something that I enjoy doing. It's turned into something that I'm good at doing. But 5 years ago, I would not have imagined that. And I wouldn't realize that I'd be the president and CEO in 5 years. So 5 year ago me would be extremely shocked at what life looks like today. I would not recognize the home that I'm in. I would not recognize the fact that I have a daughter and a new husband and all of the ways that my life has changed. The way that my life has changed was by not being happy with where I was at in life and deciding I need to do something about this and I need to move forward. And what do I want my ideal life to look at? So that was huge for me. Figuring out what I wanted my life to look at, what I want my goals to be, and what I want to be doing with myself. And I started putting things into motion for those things to be accomplished. So before I even knew what future care was, I was lining up the dominoes, getting ready for future me to knock them all over and develop into what I am today. So no matter where you're at in your life, future self-care is huge. Coming up with a plan, figuring out where you want to be in the future. What do you want your life to look like in 5 years? Are you happy with where you're at now? If you're happy, if you've accomplished your goals, great. You can still set up for your future by making sure that you're doing a good job at work so you don't lose your job, so that you have the education that you want. Do you want more education? If you want to start a business in the future, starting to think about the business ideas that you might have. So that future self-care can look different for everybody, but there's usually something in your life where you say, I wish. And future self-care is taking that I wish and turning it into I can. Because you can draft your life to be whatever you want it to be. We're not Sims in someone's video game where we're stuck doing what someone else is telling us to do. We have free will and we can create the life of our dreams. So look at where you're at. Make sure you're happy with where you're at. And if you're not happy with where you're at, draw a vision board, draw out a plan, figure out where you want to be in 5 years, and make small choices at least once a week towards getting to that goal. Whether it's writing in a book, writing out your steps, whether it's saying, okay, I need to do this for this step and taking some time to do that for that step. Whatever that looks like. Even saving money. Saving money is future care too. Save money for yourself. It's an easy way to do future self-care. Future self-care is going to look different for everybody, but it's always important that you practice it, no matter what that looks like for you. That is self-care in a nutshell. There are 3 types: my past self-care, my present self-care, and my future self-care. And the encompasses being the best version of yourself that you can be. Something that I do want to emphasize is that journey is going to look different for everybody. Your version of self-care may be something that I don't enjoy. My version of self-care may be something that you don't enjoy. That's fine. But finding what makes you feel good and what makes you feel replenished, and you patch those holes in the cups with past self-care, you start pouring into those cups with present self-care, and you plan for the next cups with future self-care. Because at some point, the water is going to be too much for one cup and you're going to need to pour it out, but you might need extra cups and where you want that water to go in the future. So that is my theory on self-care. That is a huge part of my 4-part Confidence Crown workshop series and my self-method for confidence building. Self-care prioritized is the first step to the method and is arguably the most important step. Because if you're practicing self-care, you're going to feel better about yourself as a person, whether it's internal self-care and how you grow as a person internally, external self-care, making yourself feel beautiful and confident, or whatever that looks like for you. That self-care is important to make yourself the person that you want to be. If you're not the person that you want to be, figuring out how to accomplish becoming the person that you want to be. Because nobody has to be stagnant. Nobody has to be static. We can all grow, we can all learn, and we can all be who we want to be at our core. So developing that self-care, prioritizing that self-care is the first step to confidence building, and it's also the first step to really taking care of your mental health. Because if you're someone that you enjoy and you're someone that you're happy being and you're confident with yourself, your mental health is going to benefit. Self-care is something that you're doing for yourself. Self-care is not selfish, no matter what anybody says. Self-care is important, it's imperative, and it's the first and most important form of healthcare. because mental care is health care. And so taking care of your mind and your body is the first step to making sure that you are a happy, healthy, and confident person. I would love to hear what you think of my past, present, and future care theories, and I would love to know what your favorite form of present self-care is. Let me know in the comments, and thank you for joining me on tonight's episode of the Second Chance Queen podcast. I'm Kristianna Mrjenovich, your Second Chance Queen, and remember, you always have a second chance. You just have to be willing to take it.